Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome. We are here for our Common Ground Cleveland Rising joint conversation training. Thank you all for joining us. We're so thrilled to be a part of this conversation within a conversation. Thanks for taking the time. My name is Stephanie Hicks Thompson, and I work here at the Cleveland Foundation, where we're, I don't know, live from Cleveland Foundation Studios, I guess is the joke. I am going to be helping to facilitate our conversation training today along with the great team, and we will introduce everybody in just a moment. But I want to do just a couple webinar housekeeping things for us this afternoon. First, I would like to invite everybody to open up your chat boxes alongside your webinar screen so that you can chat with us. As you can see, we can answer questions in real time as folks are talking, so feel free if you have a question to chime in there. If you have something that you really want to speak, you can raise your hand using the webinar controls, and we can hopefully allow you to speak. If you do that, please do keep any external sound or your actual computer speakers low so we don't have a ton of feedback for that. But hopefully this should be pretty smooth sailing. So that's just a little bit of our logistical issues there. So thanks again for joining us. We are here with our team, and I'd love to have everybody go around and introduce ourselves so we know who we're chatting with today. Again, my name is Stephanie Hicks Thompson, and I'm Marketing Communications Officer at the Cleveland Foundation. And I am very happy to manage the Common Ground program, and I'm thrilled to be here with the team from Destination Cleveland and Neighborhood Connections and Case Western. So, Maura.
Hi everyone, my name is Maura Garvin. I'm a Senior Project Manager at Destination Cleveland. Destination Cleveland is providing administrative support for the Cleveland Rising effort that we'll talk about, and we're excited to be here today.
Hi everyone, I'm Erica Brown. I manage training and special projects for Neighborhood Connections.
Hi as well, I'm Ron Fry. I'm a professor at the Weatherhead School of Management at Case Western Reserve and part of the facilitation team for the Cleveland Rising effort project.
So we have, thanks everybody, we have about 2 hours reserved, but hopefully we won't take that long today. But I would like to get started the way that all Common Ground events get started, which would be by letting Erica take over, because she is our lead in helping us create high quality conversations here at Common Ground. And so I'd like, if you don't mind, leading us through our sort of welcome today.
Thank you. Once again, welcome and hello everyone. The way that we start most conversations at Neighborhood Connections, out in community and for Common Ground, is we start with a check-in. And so we're going to model the behavior that we're looking forward to you participating in on June 30th in your conversations. So we use a check-in to start off conversations. So it's a way for everyone who's participating to get their voice into the room and to know that they've been heard. It's a way also for people to prime the room with what's about to happen for the rest of the day. So you want to start off on a positive note. It doesn't necessarily have to be the happiest question. You can form and frame your question however it fits for your day. But we usually start with a conversation check-in, and the one that we're using today will be what brings you joy. And the reason that we're using that is because you don't know when people show up at your conversation what they're coming into the room with. And so it's a way for people to be given permission almost to leave that to the side and to start with something brand new. So you start with a check-in question so you can kind of take the temperature of the room and get it to where you want it to be and have it primed for starting the work that you're going to do that day. And June 30th is a really big day for all of us, so that's a good way to start. So we're going to start with, you usually ask people the question, and you say that when you go, say your name, what neighborhood you're from, and then answer the question. And so I will start, and then we'll just go around the table. So I'm Erica. I live in Mount Pleasant, and what is bringing me joy today is my 17-year-old is really getting into her swimming lessons. And she sent me a text that she finally figured out how to float when she pushes off from the wall.
Oh, wow. Good for her.
Great. I'm Ron, and I live in Moreland Hills. What's bringing me joy today, among other things, is ordering I'll call it baby equipment to take to Vancouver next week for the birth of our first grandchild.
Oh my goodness. Wow. That's amazing. Thanks, Ron. My name is Stephanie, and I live in Shaker Heights. And mine is also pool themed, and that my 3-year-old daughter went to the pool with her preschool class yesterday, and they sent us a bunch of pictures. And there's this amazing picture of her that is just going to be everything in my life right now, where she's jumping into the water and screaming in glee with her arms in the air, and it's just amazing. And it's just brought me joy all morning after they sent it out.
I'm Maura. I live in the Ohio City neighborhood, and I think I'll be a little bit on theme. My nephew is 2.5, my niece is 9 months, and I was able to spend time with them earlier this week. And I just was sent a video of my nephew talking about my puppy, which also brings me great joy. And just to sort of have that connection in the middle of the day was pretty positive.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Thank you. And so with the check-in, you see how that works. And it also is really helpful. You get to know something that you didn't already know about the people in the room. It's a way to make it more personal, and people are more likely to share later on in the conversation. We like talking about ourselves. If people will not admit that, but we do. And that's a human need. And it's a human need to be heard and to know that what you have to say matters to someone else. And so especially when you're gathering a group where people aren't familiar with each other, this is a great way to quickly learn something that you wouldn't otherwise know about a person before you engage in a conversation and the work for the day. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody. So thank you. As we said, we like to open all of our common ground conversations that way because it is just the way to get to know people. And we do it even before we talk about why we're here, because really it's important about who we are, first of all, and then you talk about why we're here, right? So what I'd like to do now is talk about why we're here. Bear with me while I work through some technology here. We're here about June 30th. So Common Ground Day is this year on June 30th. It's a Sunday. And what I'm going to do is share a little bit about what Common Ground is, why the Cleveland Foundation thinks it's an important thing to do for our community, and then talk a little bit about why, how Cleveland Rising is working within the Common Ground structure this year, and then pass it over to Maura and Ron to share a little bit more about what that structure looks like. So Common Ground, this is its 3rd year, and it started as a brainstorm that the foundation had after being inspired by several other communities who were convening community conversations over a meal. The goal was really to create opportunities for people to connect that weren't based around, say, a community meeting or a panel discussion. These are opportunities for people to come together and genuinely connect with food, because we all approach sitting down at a meal with someone very differently than you would, say, approach a city council meeting. These are ways for people to talk about the things that are impacting their lives with one another in a way that breeds connection versus breeds sort of a us and them environment. And that's really the goal of Common Ground as well. When we wanted to bring this format to Cleveland, we thought a lot about what the Cleveland Foundation had that could help support it, and what our network of grantees and donors and community connections could do with a format like this. And we realized how unbelievably powerful the network of organizations and individuals that we come in contact with every day are here in the community. These are the folks who are making big things happen in the community. And we wanted to create an opportunity for their voices to be heard, and for more people to come out and become and get connected with these groups and individuals and businesses and nonprofits that are making important things happen in the community. So Common Ground started in 2017. The aim was to recruit hosts to host a conversation over a meal. We ended up with 40 sites. A little over 40 sites. I think it was 42 the first year. Last year, we more than doubled in size and ended up with over 100 sites and nearly 4,000 people participating across 5 counties. It really just spread like wildfire. And we're seeing the same pattern this year. The headline I want people to remember when you think about what Common Ground is that these are not Cleveland Foundation events. This is not a Cleveland Foundation platform. Each Common Ground event, of which there are now 80 growing every day, and you can view those at commongroundcle.org. Each Common Ground event is brainstormed, and conceived and organized by passionate people in the community, of which all of you are. You've come on board to do this, and these are your events. These are your opportunities that you are putting together to bring people to the table, and that's not lost on us. So really, what the foundation considers Common Ground is an initiative that is an infrastructure to help support these conversations to happen all on one day across the region, asking people to take this Sunday, right? Because a Sunday is usually a day where you spend it with your family or your faith group or the Browns or whatever your selected
Faith group.
Whatever your faith group, repetitive, whatever your selected affinity is. And we're asking you to take this one Sunday in the summer and spend it with the community and talk about the issues that impact all of us. And so over 80 hosts this year, I'm expecting we'll be at over 100 by the end of next week, are bringing people together around the things they're passionate about. And that's the power and the beauty of what Common Ground is, and why it's so exciting to be a part of this conversation here today, is to figure out and help share and talk to all of you about how to create the conversations you want to have. So, and when the team from Cleveland Rising came and asked about how Common Ground might work within what they were trying to accomplish, we really felt like it was a perfect fit for their goals, and we're absolutely ready to help lend our infrastructure to help them make their goals happen. So I wanted to pass it over to Maura so she can share a little bit more about that, and then we can talk about how the two hands are coming together.
Great, thank you.
No problem.
So I believe those that are watching today or later this month all have sort of different levels of exposure to the Cleveland Rising effort. And so I want to give a quick overview of what Cleveland Rising is trying to do, and then we can get into the specifics of how it ties into the Common Ground conversations on June 30th. So Cleveland Rising is a community-wide effort that's meant to sort of build trust and set a collective vision around the economic future of the region. And it's been a process that over the last 8 months, almost a year, community leaders have been trying to think about how it can both be an event this fall, which will be a summit, but also sort of a community-wide conversation in the months leading up to that. We want to make sure that if we're talking about a vision for the future, that that the community members and that we're talking about are able to participate in that conversation. So we were really excited to be able to partner with the Common Ground effort and the Cleveland Foundation, because I think it really allows us to meet people in the community where they are, and rather than sort of asking people to come into our conversations, we are benefiting from the generosity of those who are willing to sort of welcome us into their existing conversations. The summit itself, and therefore the Common Ground conversation facilitation structure, will use the appreciative inquiry method, which Ron Fry will speak a bit to, and the information and the themes from the Common Ground conversations will then feed into the sort of structure and the content of the summit itself in the fall.
Okay, thanks, Maura. So this diagram, if we can go to it. There we go. The summit that Maura described will be a very large, what we call multiple stakeholder gathering. We're planning for 800 to 1,000 people for an intensive 2.5, almost 3-day period of work. And the flow here, which will be familiar to the facilitators who are tuning into this, but for the hosts, maybe one way of describing this appreciative inquiry process is it's a strength-based method of change, innovation, and developing collaboration between stakeholders. And what strength-based means is that we, instead of starting with a deep dive into a problem analysis or a gap analysis. We actually start with recognizing and sharing strengths that we've experienced together, whoever that stakeholder group is. And then from those strengths, which is what we call the discovery phase, we then imagine the preferred future. And the whole idea here is that when people are reconnected with honest experiences of strengths that they've had together, they actually see more possibility in the future. They see the future differently. So we move from the discovery of strengths into what we call the dream phase, where we imagine the 2030 Greater Cleveland region that's healthy from an economic perspective, from an inclusive perspective, from an equity perspective. We imagine what can that look like, and then the stakeholders at the summit reorganize themselves around very specific change ideas or change projects or initiatives that they're most wanting to help make happen. And so we have what we call a design phase, where they work on what do we do next, who else do we have to engage with after this summit, what are our goals, how are we going to measure progress. And then what we call the destiny phase is the actual launch of any number of projects and initiatives, but they're all now sort of underneath an umbrella of a common vision of the future. And those projects, as they get into implementation, will include even more stakeholders who weren't able to be at the summit. So this is what's in the works for later in the fall, this big summit under this title of Cleveland Rising. Now, the Cleveland Rising title that Maura just had up on her slide, that's the result of a working group that came out of what we call a design team. A design team was about 90 people who met last December for a day and a half, and they broke into various working groups. One group was tasked with coming up with this focus for the summit. Other groups were tasked with pre-summit momentum, communication, and inclusion of stakeholders. And one of the ideas that came out of that particular working group was, how can we reach out into the community between December and when the summit happens and actually include more voices? We know that not everyone is going to be able to get away from work or away from family commitments to actually participate in the summit. We understand that. And yet, as you saw in our topic statement, we want to be as inclusive as we can, to strive for that. So the partnership with Common Ground is a great platform, we thought, to begin this pre-summit collecting more community input. So we plan to do this on the 30th. We also are setting up ways to have pre-summit interviews with individuals that wish to also have input. So what you see in the yellow box up there is the idea that from June 30th conversations and any other pre-summit interviews that we're able to conduct, people's input, their images of a preferred future, their images of short-term priorities, their images of long-term game-changing ideas for this region, all become the input to the first phase of the summit. So when the summit participants actually sit down and start talking to each other, the first thing that they're going to have to shape those conversations are the themes and the major themes that came from June 30th conversations and any of the other pre-summit interviews. So the way that we're adapting our appreciative inquiry method, let's say, to the Common Ground is using the Common Ground platform to gather community input into the discovery phase of the summit.
Yeah, and I think just to sort of build on that a little bit, that's really the intent of Common Ground, is for hosts to use it to their needs. So, you know, the structure is meant to be very, very flexible, and I think you'll see that as we walk through it a little bit today. And we have Common Ground conversations that are happening that are just, you know, people coming together to share some pizza and talk about, you know, their neighborhood. But then we, on the other end of the spectrum, we have really in-depth working conversations like the Cleveland Rising Summit conversations. Some other organizations use it as a way to, you know, collect community feedback and use it in their work. And so I think it's really wonderful how you guys are using this to sort of bring in and take in that input to fuel what's happening in the summit in the fall. So
great.
Thanks. So why don't we talk a little bit about what sort of the structure, as flexible as it is, actually is for Common Ground. I'm going to have Erica walk us through that a little bit and share sort of what hosts will receive as a part of Common Ground. There's some different moving parts, and then we'll talk about a few of the sort of Common Ground pieces, I guess, the different elements that are moving parts, and then Ron and Maura will talk more in depth about the actual conversation piece.
All right. So one of the most important things, so if you can look at what you have up there, and it's also on pages 3 and 4 in your conversation guide, really the elements of the Common Ground conversation are universal. It doesn't matter what your subject is. It doesn't matter who shows up. The first thing that you want to make sure that you create as hosts and facilitators is that you are literally setting the table and creating a welcoming environment. To that end, there will be some items that I'll have Stephanie explain to you that will be part of the host kit so that you can have those things present for people to use during the conversations.
Yeah, so we are going to work with the Cleveland Rising team to make sure everybody can receive these different portions of your host kit, as we call it. These are your day of pieces. There will be some table stickers for conversations that you can put on your conversation tables. There will be your Civility Rules cards and buttons. We will talk about that in detail. That's a traditional part of Common Ground, and I would say probably one of the biggest hits. It's like the thing that people like the most, part of the Common Ground Civility Rules buttons. You'll receive notebooks and a few stickers and some fun stuff for participants, and then some handouts and some information about post-Common Ground activities, and there is a community survey that we ask all hosts to help their participants go through and fill out. That is an important part of the Foundation's work around Common Ground, as we collect feedback after Common Ground and we make changes to the format based on community needs. These facilitation trainings, what we're doing with Cleveland Rising today, we also do in person and online. We had another webinar with over 200 different hosts and facilitators last year, and we're looking at that same number this year to try that. That whole addition to the Common Ground Initiative curriculum came through responses from community surveys. So the surveys are really, really important. We also receive some yard signs and some other things like that. So these are the things that make sort of Common Ground recognizable on the day of, and it is another piece of actual tangible stuff you'll receive as a Common Ground host. So let's talk about Civility Rules.
Great. So part of your conversation kit materials is Civility Rules. So you'll have cards that have the actual Civility Rules on them, and there will also be 6 buttons, so one button for each one, but there'll be a group of buttons that people can take from and choose from. And Civility Rules are very important. It's really an agreement that people are making to participate in the conversation in a certain kind of way. It's kind of a given that if people are choosing to show up on June 30th to participate in conversations, they are willing to agree to some ways to act and interact with each other. And so the Civility Rules aren't really like, hard, fast rules, not like my kids call it a book of warning, but they're really just how we are agreeing to be with each other today during these conversations. Those will be included in your host kit. I'm going to walk you through them. They're on page 3 if you wanted to read along with them. So there's originally a Civility Rules pledge. So this is something between hosts and facilitators where you can talk about, is this something that you want to state plainly during the conversation before it starts? Is this something that you want to have in writing up somewhere like on a flip chart? Or is this something that you just want to leave to each individual person to look at on the card that'll be theirs to take from the table? But it's meant to be a dialogue. So that's the one thing that we always want to remember. It's meant to be a dialogue, even if you're part of collecting information or you're trying to get, there's a next step that you want to take in gathering information from the conversation. It's really meant to be a dialogue. And so we really want to focus on the idea that people are here to have a conversation. It's not necessarily going to lead to a debate. It's about listening to each other. It's about understanding each other. It's about literally common ground and finding it. So by participating in common ground, we're asking people to agree to these 6 things. I'm going to just walk through them and then just explain each one as we go along. Of course, you all have the ability to raise your hands or stop me at any time. If you have any questions, just make sure that you stop me. The first one is value all voices. And on that pin, we really want people to understand that we want to make sure that there's room for the quietest among us to be heard in the conversation. So there are a lot of people who are very used to participating in conversations, and they are going to make themselves heard.
I love extroverts.
And then there are some people who need some time to process, and they tend to do that quietly, or they want to wait until they hear what other people have to say before they participate. As hosts and facilitators, it's really our job to make sure that anyone who wants to participate in the conversation gets the opportunity to be heard. There are some people who really just want to show up and listen, and they may not have anything to say, and that's fine too, but we want to make sure that while we're maintaining the space for this conversation, part of facilitating a conversation, part of hosting a conversation is maintaining the integrity of the space, and that's where everyone gets to put their voice into the room if they so choose. So we make sure that we value all voices. The next one is listen to understand. So this goes back to it being a dialogue and a conversation and not a debate. We want to impress upon people and participants that you are participating, and the idea is that you're going to listen, not because you're waiting for your turn to talk. You're not listening so that you have I know what I'm going to say next. The reason that you're listening is because you really want to understand where someone else is coming from. And so the idea is, even if you have different points of view, you can disagree, but we're not going to be disagreeable. We're going to listen so that we can understand from another person's point of view. Sometimes your own perspective changes because you've heard something from someone else, something that you've never experienced before. And that goes right into the next one. Speak from experience. We can only speak from our own experience, and so we're asking of ourselves and of the participants to really speak from your own experience, focus on I statements. It's really hard to have a good generative conversation if people are focused on generalizations and not really focused on people's personal stories. So the more that those are allowed to come out with people speaking from their experience, the more generative the conversation will be. And as hosts and facilitators, you're holding a space where people feel brave enough to speak from their own experience and to be able to say why it is that they feel a certain way, where they got that experience from, where they got that idea from, and to be able to share it with others without it being immediately attacked. That leads right into respect everyone, because we are having conversations and it's a dialogue, it's not a debate. We're respecting that people are speaking from their own experience, which is really their own truth. We respect that. So once again, I might not agree with you, but that doesn't mean that I have to be disagreeable. It doesn't mean that I'm immediately turning to anger. It just means that I respect the fact that you have a different experience than I do. I respect the fact that your truth is your truth, and that we're here to have a conversation and figure out how we can work together. Look forward. So that goes along with the appreciative inquiry, everything that's happening that day for your conversations. We are focused on looking forward. It is great to look at the past briefly to know where you started, and we focus on the present in general in conversations because that's where we are right now. But looking forward and being able to move from what's great to how do we make it better is really what we want to focus on in these conversations. And as hosts and facilitators, we are the guides to steer the conversation and to keep it focused and on task and on topic. And part of that is reminding people that we're looking forward. So even when people are speaking from their own experience, you can remind them that we're looking forward. Well, that's great that this thing happened back then, or that's terrible that this thing happened in the past, but how do we move forward, and how do we generate new ideas, and how do we discover what can be better? And then the final one, which is really good, and my favorite one, I'm biased, is question kindly. So we want to make sure that people can ask any question that they want to ask. It is about being curious, and you're listening to understand, and you want to value all voices. You want to hear what other people have to say in the room. But the idea is that there are different ways to ask questions, and we want to make sure that our participants are questioning kindly. One of my colleagues says all the time, when you have a question or when you're thinking about something, turn to wonder. Be like, I wonder why that person feels that way. And so you can give people that example in your conversations, that one of the ways to question kindly is not like, well, what does that mean? But I wonder why you feel that way. And it could also be an internal question where you question yourself kindly and say, I wonder why I'm reacting this way, and how can I fix that before I make my next statement? And so we really want to know that this is an opportunity to grow. This is an opportunity to look forward. We are looking at into the future. We're looking at 2030. And a great way to get there is to focus on looking forward and to focus on questioning kindly. Questioning kindly will get people to talk more, to feel they can be more open. And I think that amazing ideas can come out of being questioned kindly and knowing that people are actually listening to what you have to say and not looking for ways to criticize it. And so those are the civility rules. Does anyone have any questions or anything to add? All right, thank you for that part. And so I'm just gonna walk you through very quickly, like exactly like what happens, just the way the setup is. So like Stephanie said, Common Ground comes with its structure, but we don't set the agenda for the conversations. The people who are hosting and the facilitators that they're working with and the participants who show up actually set the agenda for the day. So you'll find that you have a sample agenda in your conversation guide. And also on pages 3 and 4, it's just a quick walkthrough of what makes up the elements of the Common Ground conversation. And so we talked about setting the table, literally, with the items that will be available. Also setting the table and starting the conversation moves into checking in, and we've done that around this table. The conversation itself will come about as a part of the way that you are hosting and facilitating your conversations, and focused on the Cleveland Rising information and using the appreciative inquiry approach. And then we'll also talk about, once we go through that part, we'll talk about how you close your conversation and how you share the information that came out of it. All right, so I will turn it over now to Ron.
Good, thank you. So first of all, just to link with all the civility ideas that Erica just went through. Again, for those of you who are the facilitators watching this, you can see how aligned they are with what we call generative connections or generative conversations and appreciative inquiry. And again, I think that's one of the, that was one of the attractors to wanting to partner with Common Ground and use this platform. So the focus of the conversations, the forums, will be, instead of the generic questions for Common Ground around my environment, they're going to be stories and questions related to our Cleveland Rising topic. And so there are 3 basic questions that we're going to shape. You'll have an actual worksheet with these questions listed and talking points around them if asked. Again, for the facilitators, this will be very familiar. For the hosts, these questions reflect, again, this strength-based approach. So the first one will be what we call high point stories. As Erica said, connecting around stories is very different than connecting around opinions. So we want to start with storytelling, and the stories will be cued by high points, living, working in this region, or just a story of one of your best days. But the idea will be for people to just exchange stories to begin with. And then the second category, the question will be around what are the assets, the success factors, exemplars of the strengths in Greater Cleveland that we need to hold on to, we need to preserve, we need to nurture in order to move into the next decade and in order to transform to the future that we really want. So they will use their stories, but they'll also just be able to think about what do they consider to be the success factors when Greater Cleveland or their life experience in Greater Cleveland has improved or been able to change or take steps forward. And then the third question, the meaty question, is about the future. both short-term and long-term. What's an ideal future? What does it look like if we have a flourishing economy with equity, with inclusion? So it's back to our topic focus for the Cleveland Rising effort. And what can they imagine the future would look like from wherever they're coming, in terms geographically, or the type of work they're in, or whether they're a grandparent or a stay-at-home mom or whatever. So from their perspective, what do they imagine the ideal future could be? And then we will pull out of that question short-term change ideas or short-term priorities, if you will, and longer-term really big ideas, things that we know won't happen in a 1 or 2 year window, but might, and maybe they wish it would happen in a 5 to 10 year window. So there will be just a 1 or 2 page guideline with scripted questions that you can then, I don't think you'll need to hand them out. You could if you wish, but you'll be able to read these aloud in chunks of time so people can converse about them and then begin to share what do they hear in common. So my recommendation is that no matter how many show up, you try to work in subgroups of 4 to 7 people to have a conversation so that around each question, so that there's enough time for people, each person, to speak and have some airtime. But depending on the numbers, you can organize this any way you wish with your host and the facilitator in your sort of pre-planning. We would have some time for sharing between the groups. So if we have a 90-minute or let's say 75 to 90 minutes for the overall conversation, then we're going to suggest, times to allocate to the initial questions and then time to allocate for the sharing. And then the final thing is that in addition to the host kit, I think if I'm using the right term, the physical things, the buttons and so forth, we're also going to provide those foldable tabletop flip charts and some Post-its with markers so that there's a way for people to write or draw when they're sharing. What do they hear in common? What do they hear emerging from their conversations around any of those questions? And that will become part of the quote data that we collect back after the actual, after the 30th. Okay?
Great. Yeah. How do you, sorry, I'm curious, how do you recommend that you're so if we're using the common ground structure, folks come in, you set the table in terms of the environment, the hosts walk them through the civility rules, folks choose a button, they go through a check-in like the one we just did. How do you coach your hosts and facilitators into sort of introducing the conversation? Will you have sort of a? So
we'll have not an exact script, but we'll have some talking points for presenting the focus statement for Cleveland Rising, and then introducing the questions. And then each question we will have scripted with some what we call probes. Yeah. And the facilitators are very familiar with presenting those and using those and answering questions that people might have about them. Yeah. Okay. Does that get it?
Absolutely, yeah. Because we, when we talk about common ground, we talk a lot about sort of the host's role and the facilitator's role, and so a lot of the times, sometimes the host is the facilitator. Yes. Yeah, or they're all in one. And so I was just curious how through the appreciative inquiry, how you would like.
I think the way you just described it would be a starting point, but each host and facilitator pair can work this out as they're comfortable with. But if the host welcomes, sets the table, does the check-in, and then might turn it over to the facilitator for it's 90-minute or whatever the deep conversation part is.
Right.
if the host and facilitator are comfortable with the facilitator helping with the check-in, that's, you know, but I think the way you described it would be that would be a starting point for thinking about it.
Great. Okay, so do we want to talk a little bit about the sort of the role of a facilitator in general, outside of just, and sort of I think often in Common Ground conversations, we do a whole conversation with hosts and facilitators on whether they want a facilitator at all. Because as we said, sometimes with Common Ground conversations, some are structured and some are not. I think in this case, within the Cleveland Rising structure, the facilitators are going to be an essential part of that. But I think across Common Ground facilitators and Cleveland Rising facilitators, the roles are similar. So Erica, did you want to share a little bit about sort of what their roles are?
Sure. So just one of the things that I really wanted to get into. So we talked about setting the table. We talked about the check-in. Really what I want to emphasize is that as facilitators, and especially as most of you, if you're doing appreciative inquiry, you have experience as facilitators, and so you know this about your role. We really work as guides through the conversation, and so we, talk the least amount, but have the most influence on how the conversation goes. So it's just really knowing how to hold and maintain that space, given that you don't know who's going to show up, you don't know exactly, you don't know the exact number you're going to have. People will RSVP to an event, but you be prepared that people who RSVP'd won't necessarily show up, and that people who didn't RSVP will show up. So be prepared for that. And so it's just about being flexible. And part of our role is to be flexible and to still be able to maintain the integrity of the space. And so working with your host and working with the space that you're in, to be able to, you'll have the materials that you need, you'll have the table tents, you'll have the different things that come in your conversation host kit, and you have your facilitation guides. So you'll have all the tools that you need as a facilitator. And so it's really about, bringing your best self and knowing that our role is really to guide, from the sidelines and from behind, to call people's attention back to the center of the conversation if things go off topic, to be able to make sure that other people are comfortable in the conversation and the people who aren't normally used to sharing, or to even notice when people haven't shared a lot, and to be able to ask people in a very kind way. I say if you say anything with a smile, it comes off really well. To be able to ask people in a very kind way, like if you've already shared, if you can just give a moment so that other people can share before you share again. That tends to be, when we move into our roles as facilitators and even as hosts, one of the things that comes up a lot is what are the challenges of being a facilitator? And so part of the challenge of being a facilitator is really knowing when you step in more, and when you pull back more. So if the conversation is going very well, our role as a facilitator really is kind of to be like a background singer, a production assistant, a stage manager, where we are just making sure that the conversation stays on track. We're letting people participate in the conversation the way they are. We give them quiet, timing mornings. So that's where your facilitation tools like timers can come in if you have a bigger group, or if you have a table where you think that they can manage using those types of tools. You can use certain things. We use talking sticks all the time, or talking tokens of some sort, and as you've set up your civility rules, part of your conversational rules is that you can make it plain. You set the expectations for the room, and you manage the expectations. So setting the expectation that one person talks at a time. That's a great way to start a conversation as a facilitator. We're going to be mindful, once you go through your civility rules, we're also going to be mindful that we're doing one at a time. We're going to talk. We're not going to cross-talk over each other. We're going to give people an opportunity to finish their thought. But if you know that you have a bigger group and you're pressed for time, you're going to say, we're going to also use this tool so that we only take, 2 minutes apiece, because there are 50 of us here who all want to be heard. And you'll be in your smaller groups, and that helps it move along so that no one group is ahead of another group, because all the groups have the same amount of time to make sure that the 4 to 7 people at the table get heard. So just be very aware of that. Pages 7 and 8 also have things about your role as a facilitator. And so make sure you use the tools that are in the kit, but also make sure that you're aware that there's so many other things that you can use. If the conversation, like Ron said, if you don't need to have the questions themselves on the table, if there's something that you can just say out loud because it's a smaller group or a less formal gathering, then that works out great. Don't add anything additional to it that makes it harder for you to facilitate well or makes it harder for participants to participate well, and that doesn't stress your host out. But the good tips that are listed on here especially are on page 8, and it talks about different things like group dynamics. So those tips are on there. Please stop me if you have any questions about any of those. But the ones that I really want to really talk about and focus on are things like, how do you make sure each table is diverse? So like I said before, you don't know who's going to show up, but one of the things that you can count on, there are a lot of people who will move from conversation to conversation during June 30th by themselves, but we as humans tend to move in groups. We want to go places with people that we know. So people will show up at conversations with people that they know. And it's okay where if you have name tags or sign-in sheets to like assign people a table number based on that so that they don't necessarily sit together, or to put like just a random like colored dot on name tags, and so that when people pick them, it's like randomly assorted where they sit around tables. And that gives you more of an opportunity to have generative conversations and have great things come out of each table, where people aren't waiting to see what their friend says, or I'm not waiting to see what, like, I'm gonna go to Common Ground with my mom. There's probably a whole lot of different things that I'll say not at a table with my mom than I will say at a table with my mom. And so just be aware of that sometimes it's okay to break people up and to move people around so that the tables reflect really diverse conversations. And there are a lot of different ways to break up your table so that you get diverse conversations. It could be by age. You could choose something like that. You could say, you know, people with the flowered shirts on and people with solid color sit over here. So you could break tables up that way, but it's really just a way to make sure that you're getting the most out of each table conversation. Another one that I want to focus on is, what if a participant isn't engaging in the conversation? There are some people who really will take some time to process, and it's okay to just ask them that. You can ask, you know, is there something that you'd like to add? Or you can say, instead of putting people on the spot, you can say, I've noticed that everyone hasn't had an opportunity to put their voice into the space. If anyone else would like to step up and say anything, this would be a great time to do that. And you can also give people, sometimes people need permission to know that it's okay to not participate in every single question. So they might really be interested in it and they're not being disruptive and they're not being disagreeable. They just don't have anything to say right then. Another tool that we use to help people participate who don't normally speak up is you can have Post-it notes at your table. That way they have other ways to communicate where they don't necessarily have to say what they want to say. They might be afraid of speaking in public. They might be afraid of speaking to strangers. But if they showed up at your conversation, especially a Cleveland Rising conversation, they have something to say and they have something to contribute. They just don't necessarily have the words to do it right then. And so giving them a way to write it down, giving them another a medium in order to participate is a great idea as a facilitator. And so as part of like when you're setting up and when you're setting the table, to leave out sheets of paper, to leave out extra pens, to set your table with butcher paper, with flip chart paper, or however you want to do it, and however it seems like it will work best in your setting as hosts and facilitators together. When you talk about that, make sure that it is accessible for everyone to be able to participate in the conversation, even if they're not the people who will speak up the most. Here's a big one. What if one person is dominating the conversation? It will happen. Let's just say that it will happen. It's not necessarily a bad thing. They have a lot to say. I tend to look at it that way. They have a lot to say and they have a lot to share. And this might be the one time and the one day that they are absolutely, genuinely getting the opportunity to share everything that they have to say. It is good to acknowledge that they have a lot to share. It is good to acknowledge that what they have to say is important and does matter, but you're just going to ask them, like, you are really good at stepping up, and we have a lot of people who aren't good at stepping up right now, and so we're going to just ask that if you would just pull back for one moment and give someone else an opportunity to put their voice in the room, and I promise I'll come back to you. And then make sure you go back to that person, because sometimes people really need to get the rest of their thought out. You can also invite that person to also use the other tools on the table to write down their additional thoughts in case you do run out of time. This is where the timers are really good. So if you haven't started off with timers or with talking sticks or with making people aware of how much time is in the conversation, this would be a good time to introduce that, when it's just like, you know what, I think we probably need to use this tool now. It's great to have it from the beginning, but until you know, you don't know. So it's okay to introduce it at a later point in the conversation. And, oh, here's the big one. What if someone says something offensive? So as facilitators and hosts, This is the thing that you always think about. This is the third year of Common Ground. That's not what happens at this. I'm going to knock on wood for that.
Right.
So the reason that I say that is this is called Common Ground. People are showing up at a conversation about Cleveland Rising and looking at the future of our city. People are participating in an appreciative inquiry process, and they are showing up on purpose. They read the notes, they went to the website, they know what they're getting into. Generally, you have an audience that is really open to participating in this kind of conversation. People who want to argue, or people who want to be disagreeable, or people who want to be offensive tend to not come out to these on that day because there are other ways that they can do that. There are going to be too many people around this city having conversations and, looking for ways to find out what they have in common and have a dialogue and not a debate. Generally, if you're the kind of person who's looking for that, or if you're looking to offend people, if you're like, the comments section person who only has negative things to say, probably not showing up at a Common Ground conversation that day because you can, go online and do that by yourself. But if it does happen, this is where good facilitation and having a conversation with your host, the host will let you know what the boundaries are. Like, are they allowed to ask someone to leave? Depending on where you're hosting the conversation, depending on what's happening. It's okay to ask a person, we like to say that you call people in instead of calling them out. So, and this also goes back to our civility rules. You can model the civility rules when trying to handle that difficult person, where you question kindly. It's like, I wonder why this is so upsetting for you. I wonder why you find it necessary to use that kind of language. Perhaps we can table this for now and come back to your concerns. Is there another time and place that we can do this? Like, is this something that you need to have a conversation with someone else about? It's okay to ask people to say, you can say, this is not what this conversation is about. It's okay as a facilitator. Sometimes we are really trying to keep the focus on the rest of the group, but it's okay to, at some point, if someone has really crossed a line and you know what that line is. So you'll know when it happens because it's an automatic feeling. I promise you, you won't miss the opportunity if it does happen, which I'm pretty sure it won't happen. So we're going to stick with that. But if it does happen, when that feeling comes, and it is okay to ask that person to stop. It is okay to hard stop right there. Like, so that's not what this conversation is about, especially because you're focused on appreciative inquiry, and especially because you're focused on the future of Cleveland. You already have a good model to go from. This is what we're doing here today. We don't have any room for that. One of the things that I took from my grandma is that she says, sometimes you have to crowd out the bad by having so much good. So if you don't even make room for it, that's fine. So there's not any room for it because these conversations are going to be so generative, and this conversation space is going to be so full of people looking to the future of Cleveland. And, how can anybody come in with something negative when you're telling high point stories? So we're looking at, if those individuals are looking to be disruptive, then they're really making an effort to be disruptive, and it is okay to just ask them to stop. If they can't stop themselves, it is okay to ask people to leave. Once again, I do say, refer to your host, because I don't know the definite, who shows up at the conversation. It depends on the circumstances of who the host is, who the participants are. So work with your host as a facilitator to make sure that that is an option. And if it's not an option, you can work out exactly how you'll contain that person or that behavior during the conversation. But make sure you work it out beforehand. All right. So those are the big ones that I want to cover. If you have any questions, please type them in.
Yeah, I think it's a good spot. We just put a lot of information out there, a lot of details from Ron on the appreciative inquiry questions, a lot of details about facilitating. Are there any questions? Anybody have any sort of comments or concerns? I'm going to, let's see. Remind people to set their conversations to public. Okay, sure. I'm not sure. So some of the common ground conversations are public. Some of the Cleveland Rising conversations, I know some folks are choosing to have those be invite only.
Yes.
And that's something that when you're working with the Common Ground team and the Cleveland Rising team, I think that's something the hosts decide for themselves. So it's up for that. Thanks for the question, Lenora. That was, I think it depends on the host. Ordering lunch. Okay, so the question is, ordering lunch, how much should we order? How will we know how many people will be there? Okay, that's a great question. It's a really, really good question. And it's something we actually talk a lot about when it comes to Common Ground. So it's a Sunday, and the adage is true, if you feed them, they will come. But there is a caveat. This is a free event on a Sunday, and we do find a big drop-off on registrations. So all of you who are hosting should have access to your Eventbrite page, where you're able to see the number of registrations that come through. You, when you set it up, you set up a number of registrations that you were willing to take. So the advice that we give is that hosts plan on losing 50% of the people that register. I know that is a scary number, but it's a Sunday, it's a free event, there's a ton of other stuff going on. We have seen that the drop-off rate on registrations is relatively high. So if you register 50, you can probably plan on having 25 to 30 people there. So when you're sort of ordering your lunches, when you're looking at your number of registrations, the number of people you're planning on, oh good, there's a bunch of questions, awesome. Take that into account. So, so I think, yeah, so if you're registering 50, plan on 25 to 30. If you're registering, 100, plan on 50. That's just where we are. I don't know why. It's just the nature of all free events. I know the Destination Cleveland team and the Neighborhood Connections team can attest to that.
Oh, yes.
But people are busy, and I think especially with Common Ground, people get excited about Common Ground and they register for like 4
Yes.
throughout the day. We noticed this, that people plan, they're gonna have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Like they have a whole plan. And then they do one and they get derailed, or they just end up only going to one. So so when you're ordering and you're thinking about logistics, plan on losing a certain number of your registrations and plan accordingly.
And just a piece, as I think most of the hosts know, we will be providing a stipend of up to $10 per person for up to 30 attendees, and that is entirely through the Destination Cleveland team. So if you have questions about that, you should all have my contact information, but I'll also be reaching out next week with how to provide us that information of how many people were at your site. We will be providing that as a check after the event. So it's more of a reimbursement than in advance.
Awesome. Another note on that, on ordering and drop off. Oh no, it went away. What was it? It'll come back. Let's look at these other questions. Okay,
Can
so
you scroll down to
yes. So thank you, Gary, for this question and for also sending it to everyone on the webinar so they can read it, but I will read it for video and posterity purposes. So Gary says, I'm a facilitator. Questions are: 1, when will I be paired with a host? 2, what expectations will there be for advanced communication between host and facilitator? 3, what will be the likely size of each facilitator's group? And 4, what is the expectation of the facilitator immediately following the focus group? Awesome. So
I can do one.
We're definitely going to cover 4 in just a minute.
Right.
But so let's start with number 1. When will I be paired with a host?
No later than Friday. I think most of the pairing emails should go out tomorrow, Thursday.
2, what expectations will there be for advanced communication between host and facilitator? So I will cover, from the Common Ground point of view, we're actually providing an opportunity to do this from Common Ground point of view, and Cleveland Rising hosts and facilitators are obviously welcome. We are doing a meet and greet host get together at the Midtown Tech Hive on Thursday, the 27th in the evening. So we're going to have some snacks, some food. It'll just be sort of a hangout. You can pick up your facilitation kits there if you haven't already by that time. You can pick up more swag if you say this week you have 20 people registered and next week you have 100 and you didn't plan for that. Let us know. You can get more stuff. So put that on your calendar. If you're a host and you want to tell your facilitators like, hey, I'll be here, come and meet and chat with me ahead of time. This was something we put together after learning last year that hosts and facilitators really wish they'd had an opportunity to get together before Common Ground. We had talked, we had trainings, but a lot of folks wanted that sort of, I don't know, like forced social time to get together before the day of Common Ground. And so we're providing that. There'll be some food, as I said, and that is again at Midtown Tech Hive on Thursday, June 27th in the evening starting at 6 o'clock. And we will send out information about that. That's sort of just a show up sort of situation, but that is also an opportunity. 3, what will be the likely size of each facilitator's group? So if your tables are 4 to 7.
But that's a question about what's the total attendance
Okay.
at each hosted.
So you're planning on having one facilitator
Yeah.
per event. Okay. So
If
that would
we get
depend on the host size.
If we get a signal from the hosts, and this means we'll have to check in with them closer to the 30th. If we get a signal that they're expecting a turnout of, I would say, 30 or more, then we will try to add a facilitator.
Okay, so and the 4th question, what is the expectation of the facilitator immediately following the focus group? We're going to talk a little bit about how to close out your event in just a moment. We wanted to cover off on some questions, so give us a minute on that and we'll get back to it. Lenora, when will we learn who our facilitator is? Friday, right? Is that what you said?
By Friday at the latest, yeah.
Friday. Okay, meet and greet, what date? Duncan, yeah, so June 27th, and what if I won't be in town? That's a bummer. I'm sorry that you won't be in town, but then in that case, I would communicate once you get matched with depending on if you're a host or a facilitator, it's up to you. You need to just coordinate and get in touch with your facilitator or your host, depending, and see if you can coordinate ahead of time. Even if, a 20-minute phone call will be great prep before the morning of. We also do tell facilitators, show up early, get there early, allow yourself some time to get used to the space, get used to the host, find out, maybe talk to them one-on-one about their plans, coordinate with your host ahead of time. You two, since there's going to be a host and a facilitator at each site, you two are a team. This is your event together. The hosts are managing it, but you're the lead on the conversation. So communicate ahead of time. If you can't meet them in person, I would highly recommend a 20 to 30-minute phone call just to go through the goals, go through their points of view on what they're looking for. That will go a huge, huge long way to helping you have a much better conversation on the 30th. We learned that a lot last year from a lot of feedback we heard back from, since last year was our first year of sort of creating an organized facilitation training around Common Ground. We learned a lot, and that was the number one thing. So we actually didn't hit it as hard as we usually do in the training in this one so far, but we usually say, get in touch with your hosts, get in touch with your facilitators, get together, know who you are, have those conversations well ahead of time. So we did Thursday meet and greet to try to get folks together. I think talking to folks a couple days beforehand would be great. Back aside, I just remembered the thing that I forgot I was going to say about drop-off and the number of people, as a host, gauging how many people are going to show up to your event. The best way to make sure people come to your event, once they've registered, is to communicate with them ahead of time. Through the Eventbrite tool that the foundation puts together and that Common Ground uses for our registration platform, all registrants receive a automatic notification, you've registered for this event 48 hours in advance. That happens automatically, you don't have to set it up. But we find the more the hosts communicate with the people who've registered ahead of time, the better their turnout is. So I would definitely, for those of you who are hosting, email your registrants next week. Tell them how excited you are to have them. Give them parking details if that's complicated. Let them know that you're looking forward to it. Let them know what you're serving for food. That's a huge draw, especially with something really good. So communicate, and that will make people more excited to come to your event, more interested in what's going to happen because they feel connected to you and what you're going to be doing. Any other questions right now? And then we'll go into sort of how to close out, talk about next steps, and how the pieces that will be used will go through to the summit folks. Okay, great. So, last piece.
Can I take the one on the facilitator after the 30th? That question.
What is the expectation?
Yes. What is the expectation for a facilitator?
So what we need the facilitators to do after the session, after the event, is to photograph all the flip charts or post-it notes that there's any kind of drawing, writing on, photograph that so that we can, you can email it and then we can reproduce that. Some of that literally will show up at the summit. I mean, literally, just to be visual. There will be a summary form or a kind of a sheet where we are going to ask you, if you remember back in whenever you went through the sort of AI training, we're going to ask you to pull out some quotable quotes, some key headlines from stories, key change ideas, those kind of things. Not an exhaustive analysis of anything, but just headline kinds of things that impressed you as being thematic. But that plus the literal sheets that people write on and draw on will need to be sent to us. So that's going to be the expectation after the actual conversation. And I just want to underscore there that it's important that the participants understand that their voices are literally going to find their way into the summit. So not only through themes and maybe generalizing several ideas into one bucket, but we're going to, visually we'll create some kinds of collages or maybe pre-summit reading for the people who are going to participate in the summit that actually has some of the stories in it or has some of this data that you collect from the conversations.
Okay, we got a couple more questions. So from Gary, are you envisioning a single conversation with a group of 30 folks or a moderated process of concurrent self-led discussions among small tables of 4 to 7 folks?
The latter.
The latter, yes, small tables. For both Cleveland Rising and Common Ground, we encourage small tables, groups of, we say 6 to 8, they're saying 4 to 7. Anything larger than that, it's Thunderdome. It's too much.
It's unwieldy.
Like 8 to 10 it's too many people around one table all talking at once. You've got to leave the space for people to come in. So I would then imagine, since you're having one trained facilitator at each site, a lot of the times when you have sort of one single facilitator, they will then float from table to table.
Right.
Erica, what's your experience with sort of having one versus?
So when you have one facilitator for a larger group, and once you break down into the smaller tables, you can even ask people at their smaller tables. We sometimes ask people to self-select, like, can I get a volunteer? So there's usually a volunteer who's kind of like your subcontracted facilitator at each table to just keep people on time as you're walking around. So that's the person who looks up when you timed things to say, okay, we're going to give people, 5 minutes to discuss this at the table. That's the person who catches your eye and you're like, okay, this is like the 2-minute warning. This is the 1-minute warning, so that they can wind down the conversation without you having to step into every conversation and make your presence known that time is almost up. So it's really, and you can usually tell who those people are around each individual table because people will volunteer for that. So especially if you end up having 4 or 5 separate tables of 4 to 7 people, then that's really useful. It's another way for people to be included. That's also a great way for people who aren't going to speak up as much. That's a way for them to participate. They might want to, you see that person jotting down on notes and the things that you're going to photograph later. That person is probably the person that you can ask to go ahead and make sure that table runs smoothly, or to collect any questions that people have before you move on.
And then the final question there was, where will these events be held on the 30th? So the answer to both all Common Ground events and Cleveland Rising events is all over. They are all over town in every possible neighborhood. Common Ground is reaching into 4 counties at this point. You can see the full list, and I put it on the chat screen here. You can see a full list as well as an interactive map that will let you just look around the region. You could look in your neighborhood. You can look wherever you'd like, at commongroundcle.org. As I said, we've got over 80 sites at this point, and we have a good almost, I think it's 15 or so Cleveland Rising sites that are coming online. Many of the Cleveland Rising sites say Cleveland Rising as a part of their title, so you can see where those are. The sites on commongroundcle.org are arranged by time. So the ones at the beginning of the list are the first ones in the beginning of the day, the ones at the further pages, because you have to page through several pages, are going to be the ones in the evening. So you can check that full list out there. Okay, well, do we want to talk a little bit about closing out and how to sort of end our event? And then we will bring things together and end here.
Just response to Gary. Gary,
Sure.
your specific host knows where they're having it. So as soon as you connect with them, you'll know where and when.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about ending the conversation. So you've had a wonderful meal, you've had an amazing conversation, you've taken copious notes, and time is up, and all good things must come to an end. So let's talk a little bit about how to do that.
All right, so much like when you started your conversations, you have a check-in. A great way to end a conversation, kind of like we call it putting a bow on the end of the conversation, is to do a check-out with people. And this can be something, formal, informal. It could be a question that you're asking specifically to get certain information from people. A great question to ask is what are you leaving with today? A great question to ask is, what are you going to do next as a result of being here today? So that's basically something that you'll come up with your host. And as a facilitator, you'll come up with that question with your host because they know what they're looking to get out of that conversation as a host. Also, based on the conversations that you're having using the appreciative inquiry approach, there are certain things that you'll need to collect. And so your question can be framed based on what you'll need to, move people towards. So if there's something that they need to fill out at the end, closing out the conversation preps them for being able to do that. We close out conversations with a checkout because we want people to feel like they got to the end of something. You don't want anyone to feel like, that's why we say, do you have any questions before you move on to the next thing? Because you want people to feel like when they leave, like, okay, this was great. And especially because this is an ongoing process, you want people to feel like this was a great experience doing this, and I can't wait for the next thing. So manage that expectation, set the expectation, and manage the expectation that this is only the beginning for people who are participating in this conversation. The ultimate goal is the summit. They're going to, as Ron said, literally see their words. Like they know that what they said that day really matters and really counts for something and is going to be used towards the greater good. So remind people of that in your conversations as a facilitator and as a host. The most important thing to do, though, as facilitator and host, is to thank your participants for showing up. People have a lot of choices of where they spend their time, and when they chose to come to that conversation and participate fully in that conversation and that experience, and to give, the information and to participate in these generative conversations, that's really a big deal. There's a lot of talk about, the type of spaces that we create and how we hold these spaces. That is a big deal, and it is a very brave thing. And it is, that is the beginning of, revolutionary change in the city. People coming together, breaking bread, and having a conversation about what they want to see and how they want to participate in the future of our city. So thank people for participating in that. Thank them for offering up their time and offering up themselves, really, because that's very personal, and they put it all out there for us to participate with them. So make sure you thank your participants. Make sure you let them know what can happen next. So like Ron said, where you're going to be taking pictures of everything and collecting all the information, let people know that that's what you're going to be doing. I would set that expectation at the beginning so that the people who have handwriting like mine know that perhaps they shouldn't take notes around the edge of the paper, that they can go ahead and write in the middle of the paper, maybe a little bit bigger than they normally do. And don't use invisible ink or any other type of pens like that. So make sure people know that you're going to be taking pictures of things at the end, because sometimes people want to take their own things with them when they leave. So set up the expectations so that those things don't end up in briefcases and pockets and purses before you end your conversation and before you have the opportunity to capture the information that you need to capture along with your host. So make sure you let people know that. Make sure you thank them, and then close out with a checkout question so that people feel like, oh, this was a great way to end it. And then you'll follow up with the information on what's going to happen next with their information and how they can further participate. And then that's a good thing to know also, to walk out of a space, a room, a garden, a park, knowing that I've been heard, I participated in the way I fully wanted to participate. I've been thanked for participating. I had a great meal. Someone told me what I can do next, and now I can go home and do the next thing. And people also have something to look forward to because they know that there is a next step, and they know that that conversation won't just have happened and then nothing else is going to come of it. They know something really big and really important for them personally, for their families, and for their region is going to come out of that conversation. So make sure you do those things. And I'll turn it over to Ron because you had some
No,
more.
I think that's,
Okay.
So just the,
I think I'm good.
the photos
Thank
of the notes on that will go back to the Cleveland Rising folks. From the Common Ground point of view, as I mentioned at the beginning, as a part of your kit, you will receive some information from Common Ground. There will be some information in there about the action process that's taking place as a part of Common Ground. This is separate from the Cleveland Rising task, but I don't want to leave it out because it's a huge part of what Common Ground is and what it's becoming. Thanks in part to feedback we received from our community survey over the last couple years. Erica and the amazing team at Neighbor Up and Neighborhood Connections have created a program for small grants that come out of Common Ground conversations to help support small projects. Those are open to everyone in the community. And then we're working with the team at IOB, which is a community project crowdfunding program that will work outside of the Cleveland and East Cleveland footprint that Neighborhood Connection focuses on. That structure is available after Common Ground for all of our participants, and we're very grateful for the work they're doing to help support that. In addition, as I mentioned at the beginning, there will be some information in the kit about how to participate in our Common Ground community survey after the fact. We ask hosts to help your participants fill this out. It's incredibly important because that's really the only information the foundation receives back from Common Ground. Anything that hosts create at the event, all of the feedback that you're going to give to keep Cleveland Rising, that's yours to keep, and it belongs to Cleveland Rising. The foundation doesn't ask for really anything except for the community survey, and it's really been helpful for us in the past few years in making Common Ground a more effective platform, as well as just to see how people are using it. One of my favorite takeaways that we learned the last 2 years has actually been consistent, and I'm hoping we see it again this year, is my favorite data point we received back was that both the first year and the second year, about 40%, the first year was almost 50%, which was a lot, but 40% of the people who completed the survey had exchanged contact information with someone they met at a Common Ground conversation. So just imagine this, you decide this morning that you're going to go to an event someplace you've never been with people you don't know on a random Sunday. And you go and you get there and you have such a high quality conversation that you're willing to give your phone number or your email address to a stranger. Those are the kind of connections that Common Ground is looking to make, that I know Cleveland Rising is looking to make, because those are the kind of connections when people actually genuinely come together and continue to connect and continue to build community. That's where real things happen. And that is our goal. So please help us get the survey out. Please take photos and send your Cleveland Rising information back to the summit so that they can build the summit that the community wants and needs. And thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Oh, one more.
Right there.
Yeah,
so there's a question about how do we manage the expectation for those who are interested in the events in the next step but may not be invited. Okay. So part of what Stephanie was talking about, one of the things that's part of the host kit is, so I don't actually know what the process is after this and who will be invited to the next steps, but this is also an opportunity because these will be residents coming from everywhere and different people from different places participating in these conversations. One thing that you can say to them also is after Common Ground, there's a postcard that actually has things that we're hosting at Neighborhood Connections and in conjunction with IOB. So there are different ways for people to connect. And people can still get together. So if people are exchanging information and they were really interested in what happened during that conversation, maybe they touched on something like, wait, I can do this thing tomorrow, 2 days from now. I can get together with this group of 3 people who were at my table, this group of 4 or 5 or 7 people who were at my table, and we can move this one thing forward ourselves, on our block, on our street, in our neighborhood, or I can take this back home and I know that the thing that I learned here and participating in this process, and once people learn how to use appreciative inquiry, like they kind of take off with ideas of new things to do, people still have a way to participate in this process moving forward, even if they don't get invited to the next appreciative inquiry event, because they can participate in the mini grants process. We have one that's starting immediately after Common Ground. We have action clinics that will be happening at Neighborhood Connections office and across the city, and there are other opportunities across the county, so across Lake and Geauga County, for people to participate in action clinics, and it'll be listed on the After Common Ground event card. There'll be ways for people to get in touch and do like meet and greet. And so there's like an ice cream social and like a happy hour to meet other people who participated in conversations. So it's another way for people to get back together. If they exchange information, they can pick one of those places to meet up to discuss the next idea they want to have. And there's also opportunities for people to apply for small grants in order to get something done pretty much right after Common Ground within the next couple of months. So those could be people who are going to be invited. Those could be people who aren't going to be invited, but that's okay because there's still something that they can do afterwards. There's an opportunity for anyone who's participating in any conversation through any host site to participate in something immediately following Common Ground. So you can manage that expectation where you don't necessarily have to talk about what the next thing is that they'll be invited to, but you can tell them what the next steps are that they can take themselves.
And I'm sure that there's going to be more convenings for Cleveland Rising coming up.
When will our site go up?
Any day.
Okay. All right.
So by the time that Common Ground happens, the website for Cleveland Rising will be up, and I think the next step, whether they're able to participate in the fall or not, will be certainly to have them go to the website and sign up for more information, because that's where we'll be sharing information about interview opportunities, open registration, versus an invite process. And so all of that information, we want the website to be the source for that. If in anybody's case, sort of the digital access is a challenge for them, please get their contact information and get it to me. And we'll make sure that they're sort of kept up to date on the process. So we'll have the site information available for everybody on the 30th. The other part of that question, a certain number of seats, if you will, at the summit will be open registration. So again, that information will get posted through the site and perhaps some other media, and then people can, it's not all just invitation. There'll be a certain percent, maybe as high as 50, but somewhere that is just open registration. The key thing though is that when you, for the summit, you must be there for the whole time. And that's what we know, that immediately eliminates a lot, which is why we're trying to use these other vehicles to get input for the summit. You go ahead for the kids.
Oh yeah, well, I just wanted to say again, like the calendar of events that Erica is referring to is going to be included in your host kit. And we have another question here about who receives the kits, the host or the facilitators. I would probably recommend that hosts take care of securing their kit. Once you have your facilitator, if your facilitator can pick them up for you, if you're not available on the 27th, that's fine. I think we were also going to talk to the team with Cleveland Rising about possibly getting the Cleveland Rising events kits to Destination Cleveland. So I think maybe we can just say TBD on that. Yes, you can definitely pick them up on the 27th if you haven't before then.
I think what we'll try is to coordinate maybe the kits and the flip charts being in the same place. Yeah. Otherwise, the facilitators are going to be responsible to get the flip charts, and we've yet to figure out what that distribution is going to look like.
We have the flip charts. We're not asking anybody to buy flip charts, but we will be in touch next week about the best means to get those for them. Yeah. So I think the answer is stay tuned.
And just to emphasize one last thing that Mara said about if people have digital access issues, one great thing to make sure that you have at your site is sign-in sheets, and make sure that they're legible so that you have contact information for people, so that it's way easier for you to hand that information off to Mara. Because then you can take a picture of the sign-in sheet and make sure that she has it.
Yes, absolutely. All right, well, I think that, do we have one more question? Yeah. The next step of the appreciative inquiry event, how long will the summit be? So I think that all those details about when the summit will be are still sort of up in the air at this point.
Yeah. The summit itself will be 2.5 days.
2.5 days. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll just take a second to open up for a few more questions. And but I think that's it from this team. Again, if you need to refer back, I know Maura shared this, but this is our conversation guide. You should have received it via email. This is 12 pages of delightful goodness that you can use to view and review this webinar again and again in your free time. And there will be a video available on YouTube that we will share out for those of you who'd like to refresh or share with folks who couldn't join us today. All I can say is thank you for your time. As we said, people vote with their time, and you voted to be here, and we're very grateful for the time you've given today and for the time you're going to give us on the 30th and to the community. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And if there are any questions, email me or the Cleveland Rising email, or sorry, the Common Ground email, and we will make sure that the right person gets the answer to you.
Yep. commongroundcle@clevefdn.org. I'll email you.
I'll put, for the facilitators on this one, I will put both Maura's and the Common Ground links in your email that matches you with your host.
Beautiful. All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
great evening.
Bye-bye.